By the end of 2019, I was feeling completely burnt out with running. I was tired of always being tired and even more frustrated that all the effort wasn't translating into real results. Do you remember saying that?
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that.
So, yeah, I suppose it was really just where I was at that point in time. I started running quite late compared to most runners. I only really discovered running, and this sounds really stupid, but it wasn't really in my world. So I legitimately didn't know that running was a competitive sport
Hmm.
that people did at a mass scale. Until I really got to college, kind of end of my time in secondary school, I started running. By the time I got to college, I was fully hooked. I had joined a team, I was training. At that point, it ramped up throughout the course of my time in college, but I was training pretty much every day, and that became multiple times per day. Then I went away to the States for a while and did was running D1 over there. Amazing experience, but very tough and ultimately didn't really work out super well for me. So by the end of 2019, I'd be back from the States. I'd had an endless list of injuries and I was just not getting any quicker despite putting an endless amount of time and effort into this thing. So I was just kind of done at that point. And it was something that when it first started out, I loved it. Running was the first sport where I'd ever actually excelled, let alone not sucked. It's a kind of stereotype of runners that were not always the most athletic or coordinated individuals, and I fell hard into that category. I played every sport under the sun in school. I loved them, but I sucked at them, and I, even at the time, could probably acknowledge I'm just not very good at this. But I loved the kind of training element. Like my favorite bit was the bit everyone always complained about, which was the fitness. When you had
Mm.
to go do, suicides for rugby and stuff like that, I was like, this is the best crack. Why is everyone complaining? Which makes it even funnier that it took me so long to figure out, like, oh, maybe I just like to run.
That's
So that
interesting.
transition then from
Yeah, go ahead.
to kind of going from I love this and like it is my entire life to slowly just like, oh man, this is killing me. So end of 2019, I used the term retired because it was kind of like retired from competitive running. I was not a professional athlete by any means, but the kind of level of commitment you need to have to achieve, what I was trying to do, which was continue to make Irish teams, to medal at national level and things like that. It's essentially a full-time job. So I retired at that point, and it was kind of a big change for me because I essentially the previous 6 years it had been my entire life, my entire identity. It was my hobby, my job, my pastime, my passion. So kind of taking all that away and trying to figure out what I was going to do with myself was a big relief in some ways because I just suddenly had all this time and energy. And if you've ever run high mileage, if you're doing 80 plus miles a week and then you suddenly go to zero, first, you are the most exhausted you've ever been in your entire life because you just have gained enough energy and kind of conscious awareness of like, have I been a zombie for 6 years straight? And then you suddenly just start to feel like I can do anything. I have so much time, so much energy compared to where I was before. So, kind of rediscovering what I liked about training. And then, really, really, the big part of that was changing my approach. Where in the previous years, it had been how fast can I run? And then more recently, and this is the bit I do really try to work with clients and just it's something I want to spread to more runners. There is more to life than taking 5 seconds off your 5K time.
Mm. Do you think did you're like going from being so committed to essentially to running to get them 5 seconds off your time or whatever it was, then to completely stop and was that like not difficult in terms of your identity because like you said it then obviously becomes your identity when you find something that you're good at after so many years of kind of going through sports where you were maybe average, but then you find something that you're really good at and you really enjoy, and then you're putting all this time and effort into it for so many years, and then to stop that, was that not difficult in terms of like identity change or anything like that?
For sure, it was. And even, sorry, excuse me, I was lucky in that because I did a sports science degree and I had quite an active interest in sports psychology, I was very aware of the concept of an athlete identity. And I put a lot of effort into creating that separation. they would when we were going to big events in the States, if it was less than a 10-hour drive, you just pile on a bus and drive, or you go to the airport. And like everyone slagged me for not looking like an athlete because I'd rock up in a pair of jeans, a t-shirt and shades and a hat. In hindsight, probably looking like something out of like a tween boy band. It wasn't a great time for me. But I was trying very actively to separate the idea of like I am in full athlete mode like 3 days before I even get to the event. And still, having said that, I actually quit running 3 times. It was on my third attempt I actually got out. I had a well-known one among my club where I basically said I was done in around March, and I dropped my running right down. I hadn't fully gone cold turkey, but I think in the space of a month I maybe ran 3 or 4 times. But I'd already signed up for a training camp. The club I run with, we go every year out to the place in Portugal along the Algarve, and you kind of go for 2 weeks and you just train twice a day. So I'd already signed up for that, and I kind of went along. I was like, I'm going to go and go a bit more chill, and I ended up running 85 miles a week and getting straight back into it. So yeah, like I think it was very tough. Even though the final time it looked kind of like a clean break and walk away, the reality was it took several attempts to kind of square that circle of I don't want to do this in this way anymore. But so much of my friend group, so much of my identity, as you said, there's just a lot of factors that kept pulling me in. And for me to finally make that change was significant, and definitely took a while of kind of sitting with it and be like, who will I be without this? That took a while to get used to that idea of just like, I'm not Rick who runs anymore.
Yeah, that because that makes me think of like even using examples of other kind of sports and stuff like the boxer who says, "Oh, I'll just have one more fight, I'll just have one more fight," and then they retire, then they come out of retirement and they retire again until ultimately the sport retires them. And
Mm,
it can be the same even in football as well. You see people retire and then come back and then realize that, oh no, but obviously it's different for you because it's I understand that you probably retired or you stopped running because I don't know, maybe it was all the pressure of performance. But you are back running now, so you've obviously found a love for it again in a different way.
100%. And that was a huge transition. That's kind of the post you're referring to was really about me finding that love again
Yeah,
in a different form.
yeah,
Because I pretty much stopped cold turkey for a better part of 3 years, apart from a series of stupid bets with friends that I could still do things. So there was
yeah,
one of a friend, we had a few. There was, remember during COVID, there was the like do five, give five one,
yeah, yeah.
and I hadn't run in about 4 or 5 months, so I've I think I said I could do like a sub 17-minute 5K fresh off the couch, and my friend said there's not a hope in hell, and he was 100% right. I could not. And then another one of a guy is like, you can't go do a 2 hour mountain run without training, and I went and did that. So just a series of little things like that, I suppose, kind of made sure I didn't completely fall off because I was
Yeah.
still obviously training away, but just keeping in touch with the running and doing some fun stuff with it in hindsight was probably good during that time. Just silly little challenges that had no pressure outside of I've talked a lot of shit here. I should probably try and back it up. But it was actually then when I was living in Lisbon. It just was a vehicle to meet new people. I kind of moved out. I didn't know anyone, and running clubs were really starting to grow in popularity. And this is my only gripe about finishing up running is that when I was running, running was so uncool. Nobody cared. No one wanted to know what your times were. And then as soon as I finish up, oh man, running is the coolest thing ever. If I could have come around and be like, yeah, I run like a 30-minute 10K, I would have been a god. And now it's like, yeah, I can't do that anymore. Damn
Yeah,
it.
like I was about to. One of my questions was about like this uprise in just the trendiness of running. How it's kind of really kind of combined with like fashion. It's fashionable to run. You have like all the kids out wearing the best of gear, and you know it's very very trendy. And I was gonna ask you about that, what you thought about that, but I think it's kind of funny the fact that because it wasn't cool. It was always there, but it definitely wasn't. It definitely wasn't popular in mainstream.
No, not at all. I mean, like when we were out for runs, you kind of get weird looks if you're going out in a big
Yeah,
group. Part of it was a group of short, very skinny men in tiny shorts, so that
Yeah,
might have
yeah,
been part of it. But yeah, if you going out now, it's seen such an uptick, which is amazing.
yeah,
Obviously, there is you can complain about the kind of the commercialization and the fashion elements of it and the way everyone who has been a runner for a very long time, I understand the gripe. I
yeah,
share it too, but anything that gets people up and moving has to be considered as a good thing.
yeah,
So it's hard to pin down, what is the real cause of it. I think a lot of things we go through cycles of what's kind of cool within exercise. You go all the way back to the 80s and you have these kind of, group classes where everyone's wearing spandex and doing step ups and things like that. In the early 2000s, it was more CrossFit. Now, post COVID, possibly because of the lack of the option of going to gyms and people wanting to get outside, I think it became an easily accessible way to do more running.
yeah,
Sorry, do exercise as a whole. But just the fact it's continued on so well from there
yeah,
is really interesting to see because it is a great sport in terms of a really low barrier to entry.
yeah.
Obviously, there is now this whole other side where you can spend tens of thousands to look a certain way. And even I don't know if you've come across the concept of Strava jockeying.
No, tell me about that.
This is a new one. I don't think it's as big here, but basically there are places where people will pay someone to log into their Strava account, go for a run,
I did
and
hear about that. Sorry, I did hear about that. I didn't know the actual name for it, but yeah, I heard about that. That's insane.
there's I honestly am surprised by any of this anymore. I've been in the fitness space long enough that just anything that you consider just too outrageous in terms of things you will fake to potentially gain some status to a very minor group of people. There is someone who is willing to pay whatever it takes to make that happen.
It's
But
crazy.
all in all, I think it's brilliant because it's just getting people out and even the idea that like run clubs are just the new dating apps. Well, how much of an upgrade is that? That's
Yeah,
amazing. Instead of just swiping across, you
yeah.
actually have to go chat to people and get healthy and exercise together. And odds are pretty good. Not everyone. I'm sure there's some guys who like absolutely hate running, but they see where the game is at now, so they're moving over. But you're probably going to get someone with some shared interests. So the popularity of running, though I mistimed it horribly, I can't really blame running for that.
And tell me a little bit about this kind of community in Lisbon, this run club in Lisbon that you essentially were part of creating it, right?
Yeah, yeah. So when I went over, as I said, I kind of used it as a way to meet people. I basically just looked up run clubs and went to all of them because there were loads in Lisbon at the time, loads of just kind of little groups. So I was just like, I was used to running every single day, and obviously I hadn't done that in a long time, but I was kind of at a point where the idea of running wasn't really unappealing anymore. It's like I could run a bit more. So I kind of started, I went to one group and that went well, but they only met once a week. So I was like, okay, I'll go another one as well. And that went really well. It's like, okay, there's a third one. Maybe I'll go to that. And I basically was in about four different run groups, meeting to all the people. And there were one or two people who were also doing something similar. They were kind of like among all the different groups. But it just kind of struck me that no one was talking to anyone within these different groups. They're all running, and a lot of them would be in one group and run multiple times per week, but not know the other ones even existed or run with them. So there was actually another Irish guy over there, and he had been involved with it for a very long time. A guy called David Patton. Shout out David if he ever sees this. I don't know why he would, but
Oh,
he
you never know. We
set
have a
up
big
kind of
audience,
interval
Rick.
training. We It's true. It's very niche though. It's very niche for him. There's more comment about David than you, but if he does see it, shout out to David. He's done some amazing work over there, and he's just like put in a lot of work to bring the communities together. So like everything we all did, everything I did was based off the work of a lot of other people beforehand, and I'd say a lot of the stuff other people did was really coming from the initial groundwork he laid. But basically, I went to him and I said, there's all these groups, what if we kind of brought them together in a club format? Because at the time, I went to him and I joined his group, and he was doing more kind of serious training among the group. So he was doing like interval sessions, he was doing long runs, and he was kind of doing the programming himself. So I had a chat with him, and it kind of transpired that he didn't really enjoy the programming element. He didn't want to organize anything. He just found that if he set intervals, people came and he could meet more people and talk to more people. So I kind of offered to take that off his hands. And like I love that element. And it just meant I could, do better quality training as well. So from that, I kind of had my in, I kind of started to influence more of the groups. And then eventually through David, because he was the man with all the connections, we kind of sat everyone down and came up what was at the time the LXRC and is now kind of transformed into the Lisbon running community, which has again grown so much over the last couple of years. It's been very cool to see, and like well past the point where I was involved with them, they've continued to have a great team that's just doing a lot of very cool stuff in terms of bringing together a lot of different people from very diverse backgrounds and just having them hang out and get to know each other and kind of create a really nice community that supports each other through, as we said, just running. There's nothing special about the modality of running except for it's a great way to bring people together in kind of circumstances that are about health and positively impacting your life. I'm sure if you started a pub crawl group community in Lisbon, it would do quite well as well. But it probably wouldn't have that same kind of impact and momentum that bring them together for something as positively life changing as running.
Yeah, yeah. I do think that's such a perfect combination of, okay, you're doing something that's obviously great for your physical health, but that community aspect can't be, overlooked either of how, like, and I would imagine in a place like Lisbon where like there are so many people probably coming from all over the world who are working remotely, who are trying to find new people, trying to form friendships, trying to meet people with similar values. Like it's just a great combination, just a great cocktail of just getting people together who will be similar, and being able to meet other people. I think that's unreal. But like that really sounds like that's the kind of, okay, you enjoying running for the fun of it, the socializing aspect of it, the having purpose again, being able to help other people. But obviously before that, when you were running and when you were in Texas, I presume it was all about performance. And do you think like if you're thinking back and you're thinking about this the psychological element of it, and tying your self worth to a performance or to winning a race or to a certain time, do you think that's what got made you kind of essentially need to take that break from a kind of from burning out from the sport?
I think to a degree, I wouldn't say it was the main element because
Yeah.
honestly, I loved that bit. And for me, it was partially that I couldn't do that anymore. I couldn't actually get the progress from all my effort going in. So yes, it's hard to say because I never actually got to experience properly me training at my best, being healthy, and then not getting the results for it. I think that would lead to a lot of frustration. My biggest issue was I kept getting stonewalled by injuries and honestly in Texas, pretty bad coaching.
Can you tell me a little bit about that? Like, tell me a little bit about the injuries. What did that come from? Because I know you spoke about how, through your own experience, understanding and learning the importance of fueling yourself properly, strength training, and obviously we're going to go into that for the listeners in terms of kind of things that will help your performance and help with your running. But tell me a little bit about your experience in Texas as a D1 athlete, like. What was your experience like for maybe younger listeners who were maybe do have a passion for running and might want to go down that route?
And just to set a little bit of context, I started running when I got to college. And here in Ireland, I was really lucky and like totally by chance, I stumbled across two amazing training groups, really. The main one would be Dundrum South Dublin, DSD, who's headed up by Donal Hennigan, his kind of elite endurance group. And, I knew nothing about running. I basically went to the school's East Leinster's sports day, which is like the lowest level of running in Ireland. It's the best crack ever. But it was a case of you had your school PE gear. Cool,
Yeah.
you get on the bus, you're going to this thing. I did it. I did it kind of every year. And then in fifth year or sixth year, I ended up chatting to a guy called Eddie McDonough, who's like the founder of DSD, and he told me to come on down to a training session. And I rocked up to that first day training session on the track, and I have a really vivid memory from this that we all kind of went in a circle, and Donal or Eddie, I can't remember who it was, one of them, but very casually said, like, oh yeah, and well done to the women's team for winning European Club Silvers. and just like handed out a bunch of silver medals. Everybody clapped, they shoved them in their bags, like, yeah, and just got back to the track. And I was like, is that not a big deal? Does that not really shouldn't this be more important to you guys? And it's not they didn't care, they were just so used to it. So I fell
Mm.
into this club where the standard wasn't, you know, who will make seniors this year, who's going to make the national finals. Like, are you going to medal this year? When are you going to make your first Irish team? Because that was just the norm of the group. So the standard was incredible, and that was really fueled by excellent coaching. Someone who really cared about the group and just was really. He's had people who've been coming up since they were 11, all the way up now to being like national medalists at the age of 30 plus.
Mm.
So the standard that I was introduced to was just off the charts. And then at the end of that time, I finished my undergrad, and what I always say is I basically just wasn't ready to face the real world yet, so I decided to hide in a master's. So I didn't know a huge amount about the NCAA. I just knew that it was a place you go, and obviously the quality of running is incredible. It's in the States. I knew some guys who were around my level had gotten scholarships over there. So I just started firing off applications to kind of any program that I felt like I was around the right level and they had a master's degree I'd actually be interested in.
Yeah.
So eventually whittled it down and agreed to go to Texas. And the biggest realization I probably had was that the NCAA is just very, very different from the Irish standard. Because in Ireland, obviously, it's fun, it's recreation, it's club level. You're going in, you're there because you want to be there. And the coaches are largely unpaid for the most part. They're there because they love it and they enjoy it. In America, it is a professional system, more or less. So you are an employee of the college and they are paying you X amount. And my God, they are going to get every last scrap of their money out of you. So my experience over there was one of unfortunately just coaches who didn't really care about their athletes, either in terms of they kind of struggled with the empathy side in terms of coaching, which doesn't necessarily make them bad coaches, just they didn't work with me. And then coaches who just didn't have enough experience or expertise to actually get good performances from their athletes.
Mm.
So ultimately, I performed very poorly. And then I struggled mentally and physically because the toll of the training was a lot. And then I was getting injured a lot for a whole host of reasons. And then I just ultimately ended up in this place where, I'm sick, I'm tired, I'm injured, and I'm still out. I still have to show up to training. It doesn't matter. They don't really care if you're injured. If you're injured, you still have to get up at, and being Texas, you have to get up to train at 5 a.m. because it was hot, and then go into the team meeting. Everybody else gets on the bus to go run the trails, and you go to the pool or to the rec center to go hop on the bike. And you're still doing all this training, but it's kind of becoming like, what is the point in this? Every time I get back to running, I get injured again a few weeks later.
What year was this? Because like, I think in even the standard of coaching, like across the board, whether you're working with Gen Pop or you're working with athletes, like I think nowadays you would assume, especially in somewhere like Texas, where it's probably like the hub of the world for athletics. So you would imagine, right, best coaches in the world, coaches that understand, the well-being of the athlete, have physiotherapists, sports scientists, psychology for helping athletes. Like you would imagine that you would have all them things to support the athlete.
Unfortunately, not from my experience
Yeah.
and from a lot of people I know who've gone over. There are excellent programs, but you've probably heard of all the excellent programs, and this is things I wish I'd known going over.
Hmm.
So, just general advice I'd give to anyone, advice I could give to my younger self would be if you're thinking about going to the States to run on a scholarship, and this kind of applies, any scholarship program, doesn't forget about runners, anyone thinking about going to the NCAA,
Yeah.
I would want to be very sure that they have a proven track record of Irish athletes, not even foreign athletes, Irish athletes going over and having good performances.
Mm.
Because I was one of the first Irish people to go over to this college. They had a big repertoire of internationals going over, but in hindsight, that was actually because, in my mind, because they couldn't recruit Americans.
Mm.
So there's huge amounts of resources available. Like the setup was incredible. We had access to like physiotherapists,
Yeah.
recovery rooms. Like I was going to the even though I was injured all the time, I was going to like the doctor and I was going to use like Ultra Gs or like, lower gravity treadmills and things like that. And just the resource available are great. But from my experience, the hiring policy for a lot of these is still just, were you a good runner yourself? Cool, on you go. And whether that has any ability, any transfer into your ability to coach. From my experience, like the best athletes tend to make awful coaches because
Yes.
they don't even know why they were good.
Yeah.
And especially something like running, where to be really good, you usually have to be quite neurotic.
Hmm.
It can make you an even worse coach because, just as an example, my second year, we had a different coach in my first year, my second year, because the coach got let go. And in fairness, that's also part of the problem. Coaches get turned over so quickly. It's not really a very appealing job. You don't get a lot of security, you work a lot of hours, you don't get paid much. So anyone who is a good coach is almost certainly going to make a lot more money going out of that space and just coaching for themselves or setting up some kind of a business. But the coach in my second year was a very, very successful runner in college. He ran very, very well. But as I started talking to him, getting to know him a bit more, it's like, oh, you are a psycho in the best way possible, in the running way of like, he only cared about being the leanest, fastest, meanest person out in the course, and he sacrificed everything to get that. But then his expectation was everybody should do it like me because it worked. And
Mm.
then because he was a good runner, not necessarily a good coach, he had one model for things to fit, his model. And if you didn't fit his model, you were going to get broken along the way, and I didn't fit his model.
Yeah, trying to fit the athlete into the box rather than create something around him. It reminds me of that. There's a film called Whiplash, and it's about.
Mm,
Did you watch it? Yeah, where
yeah,
he's trying to basically teach this kid to be the best drummer in the world, and it's like, you do it my way, or you just, you lose your mind on the way, which essentially he did. He achieved everything what he wanted, but he sacrificed literally everything, including his mental health, along the way to achieve that. Yeah, that's what
I
it
don't
was.
think my guy was quite as intense
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
as
yeah.
that.
Obviously, that's the yeah, but I think there is kind of watered down levels of that in coaching. It's like, okay, like you said, it's like you're gonna fit this model rather than us trying to work with what's gonna get the best out of you.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. What would you so let's say, okay, let's speaking on that, okay. What do you think that, because obviously, for those who are listening that don't know, you help people to improve their running. You help. I think one of your quotes was uh, training you to run without looking like a runner. So being able to kind of focus on building muscle and strength, because
Mhm.
obviously a lot of people want to run and enjoy running, but they also want to get in shape, and they feel if they run that they're gonna, stay skinny, and they're not content with their body and their body image as well. So I know you focus a lot on, helping people to improve in terms of PBs, helping people to get stronger, helping people with their body composition, all that stuff. What do you think that you've learned about coaching and about your own abilities and how you approach athletes or how you approach clients from your time over in Texas?
A lot. I learned a lot about what not to do above
Yeah.
all else, which I often think people underestimate in terms of valuable lessons, because you can learn from someone great and have the perfect system, but you'll actually just understand the coaching process really well by really understanding the things that don't work for you.
Mhm.
So I think an empathy led approach is the biggest thing I've learned, and it's something I talk about with my clients all the time. The idea that I think the world is hard enough on everyone. Everyone has so much stress and pressure and everything like that. You don't need to put more negative pressure and stress on yourself. And I certainly am not going to. I think a coach should be there. It depends on your level of goals. And I will be very frank with someone in terms of, if you have very lofty, high reaching goals, you're going to need to put in a lot of work. And my job is to help keep you accountable with that. But for the most part, we are not professional athletes. And this is where the kind of element of my own kind of approach to running, in that I no longer am trying to run the fastest possible times that I can. I'm trying to run quickly and I'm trying to set some PBs and things like that.
Yeah.
But the cost of me running the fastest possible time is everything.
Yeah.
And I'm just not willing to pay it anymore. And I think most people don't understand that that's the thing they're setting themselves up for when they could probably have way more in terms of quality of life and enjoyment of the things they're doing if they broaden their focus a little bit. So
Mm,
what I like to say is like I make runners into well-rounded athletes.
mm,
So instead of just going out, hitting miles, doing everything you can to scrape a few seconds off that PB, what if we also did some other cross training on the way? So you kind of learned how to work on a bike, on a rower, some other things, do some swimming if you enjoy it, lift some weights because that's a really important skill as well. Build muscle if you would enjoy changing your physique. And, a lot of runners, especially, everything I say, I'm going to say with a caveat of like, if you're an elite, if you're trying to be the best of the best,
yeah.
none of this applies. It's a different situation. You are focusing in on achieving one tiny goal at the sacrifice of everything else. And what I believe is most people don't actually fit into that tiny little bracket. So for everyone else, how can we make you a healthier human? And being the fastest runner possible is not you becoming a healthier human. And often trying to do that while also having, a life with lots of other responsibilities is limiting your progress because you are trying to train like an elite athlete who does nothing but train. And just as an example of this, it's something I talk about with a lot of my clients. And even when I was running, I I don't want to say I never had ambitions of going pro because that makes it sound like I was just like, oh, now that I couldn't do it, I'm bailing out. I just found the idea of the pro athlete lifestyle very boring. You'll see at the elite level, you kind of have two options that tend to, funnily enough, always reoccur in runners. You see the pro guys tend to get really good at gaming, and the pro females tend to release cookbooks. And that's because they are sitting around all day with nothing to do between training.
That's very true. I think it was
So
Deirdre
you've got to
O'Rourke.
just
Deirdre O'Rourke wrote a cookbook
dear,
actually, so you're right.
yeah, a lot of them do. And even a few of the lads as well. David Gillick, same thing.
Yeah.
So like these are your kind of main two options. You get into gaming, you start cooking because you're just trying to fill the hours because you are training at elite level and just like a typical day of me when I was out in the States is we get up at 5 a.m., go to the team meeting, go to training, run approximately 10 to 14 miles in the morning, come home, have a physio session, maybe have a weight session, go back, have kind of breakfast. Because at this point, you've done like 4 hours of training and it's only 9 a.m. So then you have breakfast and you kind of just got to wait around for a while until it's time to have lunch. And then you kind of got to wait around for a while until it's time for your evening workout or whatever that is, cross training or more miles, usually at least another hour, hour and a half of work. And then you've dinner. And you can't do a lot in between those things because A, you're wrecked, and B, you're trying to conserve energy. And then you're getting up at 5 a.m., so you're going to bed at like 9 o'clock.
Mm,
So you're training or you're lying down, and that's your whole day. And again, if that is what you want to do, if that is your ambition and you love it, and hopefully someone's paying you for it, that's amazing. But if you have a partner, a job, a family, other interests and hobbies, and you're trying to base your training around the way a pro trains, it's just not going to work because you don't have the time resources they have. You have to train in a way where you can hopefully get some good results as well. But the way you should go about it as a non elite can be reflective of the pros, but it shouldn't try to exactly copy them.
yeah, that makes sense. I think it's a conversation I don't think people have with themselves, especially if they don't have a coach or a good coach. It's like, okay, this is what you want to achieve, but what is it that you're willing to sacrifice? And I think we always think about what we want, but we never think about like what's the cost of that benefit or what's the
Mm.
cost of that achievement.
I think it was I can't remember who said it originally. It's been quoted on Modern Wisdom endlessly.
Yeah.
Um, Aiming for a goal without desiring the process is just setting yourself up for disappointment.
Yes, yes, yes. I think
And
it's James
I
Clear. I think has something similar to that. But yeah,
that's probably James Clear. I
yeah,
think there's a lot of that, and it's not always the fault. It can be easily thrown out as that person's just doesn't actually want it and they're being lazy. But I think a lot of the time people just don't understand what's actually involved in reaching that end point. because we're sold everything as quick, easy solutions. Like everything on social media is like an 8 week program, this one special tip, this one amazing exercise. And the reality is, anyone you see who has achieved anything, anything of significance, like we'll focus in on running, but you can apply it to pretty much anything. You can be very confident they have dedicated huge amounts of time, energy, resources into the pursuit of this. There was no one magic thing they did. They did a lot of things 1,000 times over, and then they refined it and did it 1,000 times more, and they just kept doing that. So I think a lot of people don't think about the process or don't really understand what is involved in achieving the goal. So that's probably the first thing, and that's something I really do with all my clients. The first thing we can ask is, where do you want to be 6 months from now? So we can kind of establish where do you want to be above all else? What's kind of important to you? And then we talk about like what's realistic, and then we talk about how you actually go about getting there. And a lot of the time, after that third part of the conversation, we kind of revisit the whole goal because you have to go through those steps of you want to have six-pack abs, but you don't want to stop going out for pints at the weekend. I have a very upsetting bit of information for you. So it's understanding what is actually involved is probably the first step to getting what you want. And then once you understand what's involved, you can start actually shifting what you want to align with what you're willing to do.
That makes sense. Okay, so going on from realistic expectations when we're setting these goals, what would you say to runners who are listening to this who, they don't want to be elite level athletes like we spoke about, but they definitely want to improve their running. Like we said, running's trendy now. You know, people want to be the fastest in their run club. They want to get a better half marathon time or whatever it is. What would you say to runners who are afraid to eat more, to lift heavier, or to put on muscle because they think it might slow them down? Because I know that's a psychological issue that some people kind of fall into when pursuing this goal of running faster.
For sure. And there is a very real element that more weight will make you slower to a degree. And I think it's important to acknowledge that because if I brush it aside, I'm lying.
Yeah.
There's a reason why elite athletes are tiny, tiny little people. Elite runners are like tiny, but it's not as important as you think until you're reaching the very, very top level. And until you are trying to be the best runner in the world, you just becoming a better athlete is almost certainly going to make you a better runner. Because a lot of the time, the person who's really worried about putting on size and it's slowing them down is not big to begin with.
Mm.
It's kind of like the person who comes into the gym is like, I don't want to get too big. I don't want to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger. And it's like, I wouldn't worry about it.
Yeah.
I've been I've been trying pretty damn hard for the last 4 or 5 years to get as big as possible. And I think I can say with confidence, I no longer look like a really skinny runner. I just look like a kind of skinny runner. So it's progress. But I understand the fear. I think it comes from a real place, but again, it's a misunderstanding of how the process actually works. Because at this point, we have so much evidence that getting stronger will make you a better runner. It's undeniable at this point. Yes, there are examples of elite level athletes who don't do resistance training. But my question to that is like, do you think you're that good?
Mm.
Kipchoge, famously a best marathon runner in the world, Eliud Kipchoge, famously doesn't do any strength work. And I get people saying that to me a lot. And I'm like, yes, do you think you're Kipchoge?
Yeah.
He can get away with it. I would be pretty confident he could be even better with strength training, but let's be real, he doesn't need to.
Yeah.
Everyone else, I'm going to check as many boxes as I can to make me the best possible athlete. And even, got to go further more into your question, understanding, as we said, there's more to life than just running because I've done the bit where I've really put that focus in and part of my thing in the States was I also lost. I didn't have a lot of weight to lose, but the coaches made sure I lost it. So I was the lightest I'd ever been. I was very lean. I was walking around probably like 8% body fat or under at all times. And I wasn't running well at all. I was running horrendously bad. I was actually running much better off about half the mileage and about 4 or 5 kilos heavier because just because the elites are looking ultra lean doesn't mean that's the best place for you to be to perform at your best either. for the majority of people, going into the gym isn't going to make you Arnold Schwarzenegger, and you gaining a little bit of muscle isn't going to negatively impact your performance.
Mm.
So all that's really going to happen is you're going to go in, you're going to develop another facet that we know is important for running, strength, and you are going to almost certainly see benefits in your running, but also I will guarantee you will feel very differently about your body, how you interact with it, how you look after it, because you are broadening your identity as someone who just sees himself as a runner, and therefore I have to be skinny and small. I only have to, the only way I train is to run miles. And a lot of the time I find the pushback from runners is just they're scared.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that in a judgmental way. Like the
No.
gym is an intimidating place. If you're someone who is a lot of runners, and again, I throw myself into this category. When I started running, it was largely because I was not an athlete. I was not well coordinated. I would never been big into doing, sport. Or I was the guy who was picked last for everything. I was probably a little bit fitter than everyone else, but God, I couldn't catch or kick a ball for the life of me. So a lot of these things are associated with other sports. And then running, if it's the first time you've kind of felt like you're involved in this community, and the community is kind of as a large, yeah, we don't think the gym is good. You don't want to ostracize yourself from that. And the thing that the gym's associated with is all the stuff you didn't like before. Like, rugby players go to the gym, they're all strength athletes. And if you were never capable of making the rugby team because it just wasn't something in your wheelhouse, it's all part of that negative association. So a big part of it is the gym is intimidating to me. So therefore, it's easier for me to say that I just don't want to get big. It's bad for runners than actually face that. But you're limiting yourself as an athlete and, as we both know, as a human, because I'm waiting I'm seeing good progress towards it, but I cannot wait for the day where we just all admit that resistance training is a non-negotiable.
Yeah.
It's going to be brushing your teeth in
Yeah.
terms of I don't care if you like it or not. It's just a part of how you stay healthy through all parts of your life. So forgetting the running bit for a minute, if you're not a pro athlete, most of your goals should be aligned with health
Yeah.
and being stronger, going to the gym, building up some muscle mass, improving your bone density, developing the skill of strength training. And it is a skill. I think it's just one of the most invaluable things you can do, not just as a runner, but as a human who wants to. And I always talk about this because I think it's a big mental shift for me that helped me move away, as you kind of talked about, that kind of disassociation of the athlete identity. I don't want to be the guy who's in his 40s, who's pick thin and his legs are messed up from doing 40 plus miles a week. And every time he, catches a cold, it's a pretty big deal because he has zero body fat to fight it off. So I want to care about my longevity as well. And
Yeah.
that kind of shift helped me quite a bit.
Yeah, that's such a good example as well. Okay, so let's flip it then on the other side. So you have that person who's obviously afraid to put on muscle and afraid to kind of eat more. And I think that also there's probably a lot of things tied into that and sort of disordered eating thoughts and body image issues and stuff like that. What about the person who loves running and loves how running makes them feel, but also wants to not look like a runner, not look skinny, wants to get jacked, but doesn't want it to take away from the performance. Do you have any advice for someone who wants to, one, keep running, but not lose their gains as they as they run?
Well, actually, funnily, there's a great post about this recently. If Killian O'Connor, who he had a post about this, but I think just so spot on. It was such a great reframe. It's the exact same as the guy who doesn't want to go to the gym. I keep saying guy, the person who doesn't want to go to the gym and get huge, the person who has gains and doesn't want to run because they're afraid they're going to shrink. It's not that simple. Again, we take that comparison from the elite level, and I think that the elite level athlete looks like this. So if I do that sport, I'm going to look like that immediately. Again, it goes both ways. If a big guy starts running, he's not going to lose all of his gains. If a big guy starts running and stops doing everything else, for sure. But it's actually more to do with the fact you just stop doing the other training. So getting the balance right between the two is difficult, and I fully acknowledge that. It's hard to gain size alongside running. I think it's very achievable to gain strength alongside running up to a certain degree, but it is definitely more of a challenge to put on muscle and do hypertrophy style training because they kind of, there's a bit of an overlap in terms of where the resources need to go, and they can't be directed to both simultaneously very effectively. They can be done, but you're obviously limiting your capacity to achieve both. But again, in my mind, if you're not necessarily trying to be elite, I don't care if I'm not getting the maximum possible results. So it's about having the blend right. It's about having an understanding of what's actually required to achieve each of them, because they are working two independent systems within the body, even down to a hormonal level. Running activates a separate system to muscle building. So the kind of style of training, you need to make sure they are kind of working in congruence with each other. And then the biggest element I'd say is the recovery side of things, because that's very difficult. That is something that has been trial and error for me. And usually that's, if I'm being honest, it's because I'm trying to do too much. I'm falling into the same trap put all of my clients against. And, coaches are no different than each other. I want to be strong and I want to be jacked and I want to run fast. And if you try to do all of it at once at maximum effort, you just break.
Yeah.
But learning to kind of get the balance right between those things, and then just accept that my goal is not to be the ultimate version of any of them. It's to find the balance that works for me and my lifestyle, and I enjoy it. And yes, I'm still making progress, because obviously it's not very fun to put in lots of time and not actually make any progress. But if you're getting the balance right, you can make progress. It might just be a little slower than you want it to be, but being real, who has ever said their rate of progress is fast enough for them? Everybody wants to get where they want to be immediately, preferably yesterday.
Yeah, I think with Killian's post, I think he said something uh, like playing basketball doesn't automatically make you taller, and I thought
Mm.
I thought that was very accurate. So we know then that you can run, you can enjoy running, and you can still stay in shape, or you can get in shape. It will take longer than you think, and it's not going to be optimal. It's going to be practical. Now, for those listening, okay, let's have a hypothetical here where they do have time to train, and it can be more optimal than practical for their lifestyles. Do you have any kind of advice or insights into like a ratio of gym sessions to running sessions that would really help, let's say, someone who wants to improve their half marathon or their 10K, and like someone who says, oh, I should I be spending more time out on the road running? Should I be spending more time, in the gym, doing my sessions? Should it be 50-50? Should it be, full body training sessions? Should I be doing a bro split? What should I be doing with my running? Because I heard something about long runs, and I heard something about interval sessions, and now without having a coach, this is information overload for me. So do you have any kind of simple layout formats for the majority of people? And I know you can't give sweeping advice across the board. Everything's going to be individualized,
Mhm.
but do your best.
But I can't give you the magic formula, but I'd really like the magic formula, so give it to me anyway. And just to quickly, with slight sidebar, but just to kind of acknowledge what you're talking about, that kind of person there, I also think it's really important to note, although I talk about being suboptimal, which is true, the level of performance you can achieve now. We're seeing guys come out of the woodwork who are doing incredible things. Guys running
Mm,
2:30 marathons like Jake Durnham, and he is strong and he is jacked.
yeah,
Nick Bear, sub 240,
yeah,
same. So the idea that yes, this they won't be elite, but what most people would consider like an absolute dream, borderline for most people unattainable.
yeah,
Like if you're trying to go sub 220 to marathon, okay, this combo probably isn't going to work.
yeah,
Everything up to that point, yeah, man, you can do both and have it all, and why not?
yeah.
So, in terms of getting that training split, I don't have a magic formula because it is very difficult to get it balanced. But the biggest thing is probably first and foremost, figure out which is most important to you right now,
Mm,
because you don't want to try to drive everything all at once. You go through seasons, and that's the same with any sport. So even if we consider this, theoretically, it kind of falls under the hybrid umbrella.
yeah,
There's no actual sport classification here, but if I'm trying to get better as an athlete at my chosen sport, I don't try to get better at everything all at once.
mhm,
So the first thing I'm going to figure out is like, how much time do I have to train? Okay, how many hours and days can I set aside? Cool. Then I'm going to go into my kind of split of how much can I dedicate to each. So if I am currently, and say this is the way I did it in a kind of grander scheme of things, was I put a lot more time into running. I just did it on a 6 year schedule. And then I put a lot more time into strength and size. I did that on a 4 year schedule. And now I'm doing a bit smaller cycles of prioritizing both.
Yeah.
But say right now, my schedule is I'm doing 3 days a week of each. And
Yeah.
I think that's usually, if you have time, you like training every day, 3 and 3 is a great place to go to because you got a nice blend. If you are more interested in running, 4 and 2, 4 runs, 2 gym. If you're more interested in gym, 4 gym, 2 run. That's a really nice place to go to. And then it's just kind of like, where is your main focus? So if I am more focused on the running, more of my intensity and volume is going to go there. The number of sessions might not change, but my running sessions are going to be harder. So the 3 days per week as well is a nice one I find because if ever I'm designing a running program, I'm terrible with names. So I'm going to keep quoting a lot of people and not telling you who they're from. But there's a coach who famously said you want a long run, a high intensity workout, maybe once or twice a week, and then easy miles as much as you can tolerate to fill up the gaps. So in my general programs, I try to really emphasize those elements that are actually going to drive adaptation quickly.
Yeah.
We hear a lot of stuff around zone 2 training and going low and slow, and that is really important. But the higher your mileage is, the more important it is. If you're only doing 2 runs a week, you can do a bit more intensity.
Yeah.
You can just do two because it's kind of like saying if you're going to the gym 6 days a week, not everything can be like a 1 rep max all out. But if you go to the gym once a week, you can go harder because you have more time to recover in between. So, in terms of kind of the running program, I'd try to have 1 day a week that's a long run, 1 day a week that has some kind of intensity, whether that's intervals, whether that's sprints, whether that's tempos, like just something that kind of gets you your heart rate up and ideally get you in towards your target race pace, because that is the idea of intervals. We can go into that in more detail if you like. And then another day that is maybe something a bit shorter and easier. So as long as you have something that's intensity, something that's long, and something that's maybe short with some sprints.
Hmm.
Those are kind of the three big boxes. You will see huge improvement because you're again developing yourself as an athlete. So this is something I try to do within my running as well, where a lot of the time you have people who are just say training for a marathon, and all they do are just easy miles, easy miles, easy miles. They're basically just doing a long run every day, and that isn't the worst way to train, but it's kind of like going to the gym and just doing bench press at the same weight for the same number of reps all the time. It'll get you some results, and over time, if you just slowly add more reps, you will make progress. But you do a lot better if you change it up a bit and
Mm.
create a different stimuluses to get more adaptation, more different areas of fitness. And running has, although longer distance running on the surface just seems like go in a straight line for as fast as you can for as long as you can, there is more nuance to it than that. So you want to develop all of your different systems in the body. You want to develop all of your skills as a runner. So kind of checking those three boxes is where I'd really start for most runners. Long run, some kind of interval session, some kind of easy run with some sprints.
So variety is good in that regard. I never asked you actually, what was your race? Like were you a was it a 10 kilometer? Was it a 21 kilometer? Was it when you were training in Texas?
I was mid dis well, I was a mid distance guy, but I was
Mhm.
probably somewhat in denial that I was probably more like a mid long distance guy because I had just enough speed to get away with being kind of a 1500. That was my main race.
Yeah.
But in hindsight, almost all of my best racing was over cross country 10K.
10K,
So
yeah.
like that's where I made my Irish teams and things like that. So I wanted I think it's a pretty normal curse of runners. We all want to be faster than we are.
Yeah.
All the 10K guys would like to run 5K, all the 5K guys would like to run 15, all the 15s would like to be sprinters.
Yeah, yeah,
So the dream is just to be a 100 meter runner where you just you like you get to be jacked, you get
yeah.
to be strong, and your race is done in 10 seconds. But
Yeah.
that's where the kind of genetic curve starts coming in real hard. And again, any runner who's insulted by this, I am lumping myself in this. We had a joke we used to talk about in my run club where we basically had like the sport continuum breaking down over time. And say, just as an example, at the highest level of sport, like can you hit an object with another object? So like baseball, where you got like something's coming at you, you have to use something else and get that level of coordination, and
Yeah.
it goes down. It's like, can I do that? No. Okay, can I throw an object? So I don't even have to use any other implements. No. And you keep going down, down, down this list until the level of coordination goes really, really down to the bottom barrel. And it's, can you put one foot in front of the other? Yes, I can do that. Final question, can you do it quickly? No, I can't. Okay, you're a distance runner.
That's very true. Actually, speaking on, let's say, 100 meter sprinter and stuff like that, do you think that it like it's largely like obviously there's going to be this element of hard work and dedication and committing your whole life towards that sport, but like for those listening and for you obviously seeing this up close in person in terms of different athletes, like how important is genetics when it comes to that level of sport or
Oh,
athleticism?
everything.
Yeah,
It's everything. And this
yeah,
is something that I admit with a lot of like, ugh, because I'm not that person. I don't have those genetics. But there's just something different you see in these elite level guys. And sprinting is the perfect example
hmm,
because if you see a sprinter move, like a really high level sprinter, and even when they're young and they're not super developed yet, they just move differently to everyone else. They have this kind of fluidity and this coordination that seems to come very naturally to them. They are the kids in school who are just they're first on everything because they are just fast, they're coordinated, and usually the worst bit, they're lovely people as well. That's the real pain in the ass. You can't
you
even
can't
hate
even
them.
hate them.
Yeah. But unfortunately, the old idea of, and it's actually another post I'm directly quoting I saw some stage this week, hard work beats talent if talent doesn't work hard. There's a gram of truth in that, but there's just too many stories of guys who just did nothing
Yeah,
and worked into the top level. And it's not to take away, because obviously to be the very best, you have to work very hard to get there. But the average elite athlete was elite pretty much from the day they were born.
yeah,
They were better than everyone else the whole way through. We love the idea of the like grit and grind and overcoming because it's essentially a fairy tale.
yeah.
It doesn't really it can happen, but it's such an outlier. That's why it's noteworthy. The
Mm,
reality is elite athletes are elite from day one, and if they choose to act on those elite genetics, there is nothing you or I can do to overcome that. But an important caveat from this downward slide into depression of we are all but mere mortals compared to the mighty athletes. I do think the idea that the elite 1% are just something you're born with. I think pretty much anyone can get into the kind of top 10% of any sport
mm,
with time, effort, and dedication. So if you don't have those elite genetics, will this be your paid job? Probably not. Could you be the best person that you or anyone that you know knows at this sport? Could you be someone who's like noteworthy in terms of your circle, even your country? Quite possibly, if you're willing to put in that time, effort, and dedication. So, to anyone who has the ambition and they're not sure if they're that person, the only way you'll ever really know is by trying.
yeah,
You can't do, there's no test. As much as say you can see it, you can see that person who's an elite sprinter. Yes, that's a certain degree of truth in it, but even still, they still have to put in the time, effort, and work. And there's a lot of people who looked amazing who never actually fulfilled their potential.
yeah.
But as I say, most of the time, I'm not talking about elite athletes because I think we spend so much time talking about the elite level of sport,
Hmm.
which is cool and inspirational, but for the most part, it's just not applicable to everyday people.
Yeah,
We need to talk about the concept of the everyday athlete. And if you want to be a really good everyday athlete, like better than everyone, because not everything's about being better than everyone, but sometimes that's a pretty big motivator. Like you said, if you want to be the fastest person in your run club, just working really hard at it, you can still be the fastest person there. You're just probably not going to get paid for it.
yeah, fair. I wanted to quote you on something else you said that I thought was really, really interesting, and it's probably something that people who maybe aren't educated on their training when it comes to running might be surprised with, but could be really helpful information for them. So trying to make your cross training more running specific is probably just making it way less enjoyable. So can you explain that to the listeners? And also, you also spoke about running. You did a 10K in 32 minutes from basically swimming. Could you tell that story as well?
Yeah, for sure. So they are actually quite well linked. So it is a good story of basically before I went to the States, I had a pretty major injury, and that's a whole story of itself. But I basically ran myself into the injury because of a race not going as I planned. So I actually went over to the States injured initially. So can't blame the coaches over there for that one. That was on me. But I was very singular focused at the time. So I got very good at cross training. And actually, the summer for that one is one of those moments where I look back, it's like, man, I can't believe I actually did that. I was in a boot because I had a grade 4B stress fracture. So a 4C is essentially a full break.
Yeah.
So I was, and honestly, that probably would have been better because if you get a full break, you kind of have clear timelines and things like that. If you're on a stress fracture, there's a certain degree, you just have to kind of wait and see how it responds. So I didn't run for the better part of about 6 months because I was just in a boot. But that summer, I was working in a summer camp trying to get some money together while I was heading over to the States. I was in a boot, so I was living in a school. The school had a tiny little gym, and I couldn't do anything really that involved any form of weight bearing. So what I did that summer, and this is a perfect example of how to make your cross training awful, is I flipped an exercise bike upside down, sat in a box, and did arm crank for an hour every morning and an hour every evening for the 3 months I worked in that camp.
Horrendous.
It was pretty awful. It's pretty awful. I made up a lot of different training styles and games with myself to keep myself sane. I don't know if it helped me stay sane or slowly made me more mad. But I went to the States, and then I like because of this, I was actually still in pretty good shape because
Mm.
although I'd kind of been doing the strength training that I could do after a while. I couldn't do any weight bearing for a while. I could do things like leg extensions, machines that kind of target and isolate the quads. So I maintained that, and then I had to transition into kind of biking and swimming. And biking kind of sucked. I really liked swimming, and I found that it was really good aerobic exercise.
Yeah.
Partially because I suck at swimming. Coming back to that coordination thing,
Mhm.
so I would flounder up and down the pool, but regardless of my swimming technique, because I didn't really care if I was an excellent swimmer, I just got quite aerobically fit.
Yeah.
So I was doing sessions in the pool that were like 3 or 4K, and again, twice a day. So I was spending 2 to 3 hours in the pool every single day doing workouts, and I basically started recreating running training in the pool. I was going for long swims, I was doing interval swims, I was doing some sprints. I was targeting the energy systems of the body. And then by the end of that, I basically, I think, I can't remember exactly how many runs. When the boot finally came off, I did some protocols of like a minute walk and a minute jog, which was wild as a concept to me, having come from 80 miles a week, where if you're not going out for like a 6 mile run, it's not really a run. It
Mm.
doesn't count. So going to minute on, minute off jog around the indoor track of the rec center was weird. But so I'd say I had maybe a dozen runs total. All of my speed work, all of my intervals were in the pool or on the bike. The
Mhm.
runs were just to get my body used to impact and kind of the skill of running, because there's a skill element to it.
Yeah.
And then I went out to the first race of the season. Sorry, I missed the first couple of races of the season. The first race I ran was conference, and I came something like fifth on the team. So it wasn't an amazing result, but I hadn't run at all, and I was running fine. I was able to keep up with the guys who've been running all season. And then we went to regionals, and I was fourth. I can remember I was third or fourth in the team, and I ran a 10K PB in 32:10 or something like that. And I'd run a little more since then, but 90% of my season was spent arm biking,
Yeah.
swimming, and then eventually cycling. And this is the bit that comes back to the cross training element, because you can get really fit by just getting fit. And people kind of forget that idea. Fitness is fitness. Yes, there's a skill to running. You have to work on that. But if you're working hard and challenging yourself aerobically, getting your heart rate up, spending times into the correct training zones, that will carry over to almost anything. And this is why the point I make of people trying to make their running, their cross training really running specific, if the version of that sucks to do, and just a classic example is things like elliptical, or I don't know if you've ever heard of aqua jogging.
No.
Aqua jogging, anyone who knows what that is has just kind of had a little shudder go through their spine. Aqua jogging is an abomination, and I will not hear otherwise, where you basically it's a protocol designed for injured runners. You wear a little floating little like Batman style floaty belt
Yeah.
in the pool, and you
Oh yes.
jog
Yeah.
up and
Yeah. Yeah.
down the
Yeah.
pool. You
Yeah.
do a running motion up and down the pool, and it is tedious and boring and awful, and you go nowhere. And I'll also add, it in no way is a running motion because there's no impact. You're
Yeah.
just cycling. But anyway, people will argue differently. But I've done some aqua jogging and stuff like that. And I kind of included that because at the time I was singular focus. I was a sports scientist, so I saw the research that said this might be better. And I know for a fact I just didn't work as hard on those aqua jogging sessions because it sucked. I
Yeah.
hated it so much. Whereas if I went on an exercise bike and I could get my heart rate up and I could work my quads, I was doing everything I needed to do, and it was still going to have great carryover. So the idea that there are these things, and this applies to a lot of the elements of the way I train people as a whole, the idea that there is one correct way to do things is usually just a way to set yourself up for failure, or at the
Mm.
very least misery,
Mm.
because someone else decided this is the best way to do it, but is that the best way for you to do it? Most of the time, the way to get the best results are to enjoy it.
Yeah.
And that applies to pretty much, like, as you know, as a PT, the best thing I can do for my clients is set them up to train in a way that they actually enjoy,
Yeah.
because then they're going to do it and they're going to want to do it, and it's not going to be misery, and it stops becoming this thing where it's like me versus the thing, and it's I do this, I become that person, I enjoy it, and the results start coming.
Yeah.
So if I'm injured, which is really hard as an athlete, is talking about that athlete identity again, if you're injured and you're trying to cross train, you're probably dealing with a lot of frustration and upset about the fact you can't just go run. Why would I go make it worse for myself by doing something that I also really hate? If you don't like cross train, that's okay. Not everyone does, but don't go pick your least favorite kind of cross training, because God, this sucks enough already, my man. Don't make it worse.
Yeah, but it's also, even if it's, let's say we're not talking about the high level athlete, but let's say even like just some regular Joe training for their first half marathon, and they've after getting injured, or they've got shin splints, or their hip is starting to hurt from the impact of the concrete and stuff like that. Like, knowing that, okay, I can jump on a cross train, or I can jump on a spin bike, or I can jump on a rower, and I can get cardiovascularly fit, and that will have carryover to me on the day. Like, that's optimistic for them to know.
Sure, it takes off so much pressure.
Yeah.
It's something I try to really work into my clients as well. It's like there's always something you can be working on.
Hmm.
And that's a really important lesson, because so many people fall into that all or nothing mindset. And it's so typical of someone preparing for some kind of event, like, say, their first marathon, where you're excited to get going, you jump into it whole hog. Maybe you should have started with a 10K, but you said, fuck it, I'm going to go straight into the marathon. You inevitably get injured because your body hasn't done anywhere near this kind of training before.
Yeah.
And now all you see is this ticking clock where the marathon is X days away and I am not running. And because you're only focused on this one facet of your fitness, all I'm trying to do is run the marathon. So all I'm going to do is run. Whereas during that whole time, you could be getting fitter and stronger. And then when you're able to run again, you have this excellent base. And realistically, if you're a beginner, you're going to be further along than when you started. The more advanced you are, obviously, the more specific you need to get. But for the majority of people, if you are just moving, like if you ride a bike, you're going to get better at push-ups. So if
Hmm.
you are someone who's training for any relatively moderate level of success in your running, like as long as you're not aiming for, like as I said, like a sub 3 hour or 2:30, you just getting some movement in is going to be a benefit to that. And a It's something a lot of my runners will do. We actually take away a little bit of mileage sometimes. We'll swap some of that out to some cross training. We'll have a discussion about what they actually enjoy doing cross training because usually when I try to take away miles, everybody volunteers with the most awful thing they can do in replacement because it's a punishment, obviously. If I make you run less, you've been bold. No, it's a simple case of there's probably other stuff you could do here, and then the kind of big parts of the running that I talked about before, your kind of intervals, your long run, now you have more energy. You have, I don't want to say like more injury bandwidth, but the total impact of your training is significant in running. The more time you spend on your feet, the more miles you put in, the higher injury risk is. So if I am spending less time in that kind of riskier modality during the week, I can do more in those tougher sessions without that fear. So not only is it great when someone is actually injured, it's going to prevent you from getting injured in the first place.
Mm. I also wanted to talk to you about spending too much time in the gym doing like drill exercises and stretches versus actually getting in there and lifting heavy weight through full range of motion.
Mhm.
Is that a mistake that you see runners make?
Hugely. I think it comes back to once again the idea that runners can be intimidated by the gym. And there's this idea of you don't need to go to the gym. You can do this little band exercise instead and do this step up and like, ooh, look at this fancy little exercise we have. Isn't this nice? And if that helps you to get into the gym and get started, for sure, by all means. But I am very sick of seeing, especially runner influencers, especially large guys, possibly on a cycle of gear, doing little clamshells and being like, this is how I grew my legs. It's like, my man, come on. So you can do it that way. But it's kind of like, as I said, the idea that you're only ever going to run easy miles. You are missing out on the real benefits. And all the research we have says that it's heavyweights that does the job you're looking for. Even if you've no interest in gaining muscle and you don't actually care about getting stronger, but you just want to run faster,
Mm,
heavyweights are still the answer.
mm,
And to the idea that it should be, and this kind of comes back to what you were saying earlier, the kind of running specific, like it should be running specific training. I already am doing so much running. If I
mm,
needed more running specific training, that would be running. The point of doing accessory work like strength or cross training is to get in something that your running isn't giving you.
mm,
And that is where running is essentially lots, thousands and thousands of quarter rep body weight exercises. So what I don't need to do is go to the gym and do a circuit of 1,000 quarter rep body weight exercises because I already got that covered. Now you're just doing a crappier version of it. What I don't get in running is heavy weight bearing and a large range of motion. And you know what does heavy weight bearing and a large range of motion really well? Barbell basic exercises. So, and I say barbell, it doesn't have to be barbell. Obviously, you can do any version of it that's going to help you get stronger.
mm.
But it's funny because pretty much every complaint or reason everyone gets throws at me, it all circles back to the same thing. And it's like, I don't like the gym. I don't want to spend as much time there. Cool. Do like two barbell exercises and leave instead of 20 circuits.
Yeah.
I'm nervous of this. It's like, okay, cool. This is going to be quicker and easier and safer, and you have way more control over how much weight you actually put on the bar. No matter what the reasoning is, it pretty much always comes back to, yeah, this is the simple best answer. Get a bar, put some weight on it, learn to do those things well, and it's going to check all the boxes. You can do it more if you want to gain more strength and gain muscle. You can do it less and spend less time in the gym because it's way more efficient than what you were doing before.
Yeah. And then let's say, okay, that's the runner who doesn't who's nervous about the gym, and we need to get them in to just do some simple compound exercises in and out and let that complement their training. What about someone who's a little bit more advanced? They're not afraid of getting under a barbell. They're not afraid of doing a couple of deadlifts. They're running hard at the moment. I know in your training highlights you do a lot of Olympic lifts and stuff like that. What role does Olympic lifts have in training to improve your running?
I love Olympic lifts. I don't think they're necessary at all.
No.
They're one of these things that I see on social media a lot of runners talking about the benefits of Olympic lifting.
Mm.
And the benefits of Olympic lifting are kind of force, power, and strength. But the bit that people fail to mention is that Olympic lifting is a sport.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like saying, I want to learn to read sheet music, I'm going to learn to play the piano. And it's like, there's a lot quicker and easier way to do this. I do Olympic lifting because I enjoy it and I
Yeah.
love going to the gym, and it's a whole new skill to work on.
Ah,
But again, understanding the outcome versus the process, people see the Olympic lifting, and I've taught a good few people to Olympic lift. From my experience, it takes the better part of a year for Olympic lifting to get to a point where it is actually going to be a useful training tool for you to get the benefits people talk about. Because early on, it's so technical, you're going to just spend a lot of time doing lighter weights, which bad form.
yeah.
Because if you want to actually learn, that's what it takes.
Yeah.
It's a really technical skill. It's a lot of fun, and if you are into the gym, for sure. But it does grind my gears when I see, elite level athletes who are doing the most god awful cleans I've ever seen, and the excuse are like, oh yeah, but they're not Olympic lifters. It doesn't have to be perfect. And while that's totally true, it's how many days a week are they actually doing this skill? Has no one actually taught them to do it right? So if you want to learn that skill because it's fun, it's interesting, and you're going to work on doing it as well as you can, amazing. Olympic lifting is so much fun. You have to have your fundamentals in line first. If you can't do simple things like deadlifts, squats, shoulder press, that's where you need to start. When those are very natural to you, you can start moving on to higher level things. But if you're just doing it because you feel like you need it to achieve a certain level of performance, you don't need to learn another sport to get better at your sport.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense.
There's much
I want.
simpler options.
I wanted to just ask a couple of questions, even on kind of self-talk and stuff like that. Did you have, any pre-race rituals or kind of mental cues like that helped you go from like, were you ever like anxious, nervous before a race that kind of switched you into performance mode?
I was a big believer in the pre-race rituals and
Yeah.
performance. I was lucky, I think, that I came to running a lot later because it gave me a lot of tools in this that I think a lot of runners miss out on. For instance, I know a lot of runners get really nervous before races, and I think a lot of the time it's just obviously the reason for your nerves are very different. There's a lot of different theories about this, but usually it comes from the kind of heightened senses that you get during that, the kind of what we call arousal, where your heart rate is up, your kind of racing thoughts. Some people can interpret that very positively, some people can interpret it negatively. We know there's a thing called what we call the eyes off, the individual zone of optimal functioning, where somewhere in that range is best for you.
Mm,
So individual people, some people will love like banging music, people slapping their back, running around screaming. And for some people, they want to sit in a quiet room. Neither of these is wrong. It's what's going to help them get into the right headspace.
mm,
But obviously, competing, there's always going to be a kind of heightened something going on. If you're on a race day of a marathon, there's music blaring, there's thousands of people, you're all corralled together, the gun goes, your heart is going to be going 90. So I was lucky that I did team sports first, and it's kind of normal to be pumped and accept that feeling. Whereas running, because it's that little bit more individual and you spend so much of your time just running in somewhat isolation, it's such a change that I think a lot of runners don't have any experience outside of race day itself, where things are very chill, things are very quiet, and suddenly wham, and they don't have the tools to interpret those signals as nothing's wrong. You're just excited to be here. This is what
mm,
it's like when you're about to do something really challenging and hard. So, first off, the biggest thing is just understanding that the signals from your body are not a bad thing. They are just your body preparing you to do the hard work, and then getting different practices in place that will help you to get your best result. And that involves some people getting really hyped, really excited. For some people, they want to take that nervous energy and dial it down a few. So, for instance, I'll talk about my kind of approach to this. I was someone who liked to get kind of hyped up before a race,
mm.
but not too soon before a race. So in the build up, there's actually probably some videos of me in Texas. I'd bring my hammock to meets, and I'd find a place and I'd string up my hammock, because if you're going to like an event, you're usually there for the entire day, because obviously there's an entire team competing. You're not
Yeah.
just there as a runner. And like usually the 1500 was towards the end of the race, and occasionally I'll be on the 4x4 team, which was the very last session of the meet. So up until that point, and this kind of goes back to me kind of not being the athlete all the time, I would be wearing my jeans, I'd be sipping on a Coke, I'd have my earphones in, I'd be chilling in my hammock. And I am not a runner at all in this moment. I am just chilling out because I was really just trying to conserve my energy. Because when it was time to go, I like to really ramp it up and kind of feel energized. But if I do that too soon, I'm just going to feel really depleted by the time the race came around. So my tactic was just kind of just, I am chilling, I am having a good time. And then usually set a timer or something like that. So I'm not checking my watch every 30 seconds. And I know that it's time for me to click into race mode. So having that distinction for you, like when is your actual time to start getting hyped up or to start calming down is important. And then the other facet outside of just kind of mantras is actually routine. Routine is hugely important. How do you prepare for the race? Because that's going to start showing your body that these kind of signals you experience, whether it's a high heart rate, whether it's, you feeling a bit sick and nervous, things like that, which are totally normal, they're just part of the process. They're not things that you're not prepared for. Like there was a girl in my club who used to get sick at the start line of every race. She was an amazing runner. She was like national caliber and like several Irish caps, but every race she'd go throw up. But it was literally just like walk to the line, take a hard right to the nearest bin slash bush if it was cross country, throw up and come back. And anyone else that might have, that could really phase you.
Yeah.
But I'm not saying take that approach. It
Yeah,
probably
yeah,
wasn't
yeah.
perfect, but she did run pretty fast. But she had that kind of just in her routine was like, I do my warm up, I do my strides, I put on my race number, I go to the line, I puke,
Yeah.
I race. And for me, I had that kind of, I would lie in my hammock, I would chill out, listen to music, I'd set a timer that gives me time to go do my warm up, and then I run for 2 miles, I do X drills, I put on my spikes, I do one set of strides, and then I go to the start line.
Yeah.
And because of this, there isn't that time for your body to start interpreting signals as like, oh, something's going wrong.
Mhm.
Because everything is just how I expect it to be.
Mm.
I've done this, I've kind of built a system where now I feel like I'm very in control. And it's something I say a lot, the idea of controlling the controllables.
Mm.
You can't control so many facets of your race, whether it's the conditions, whether it's delays in the start time, whether it's your other competition. But you can control how you go about dealing with all those things. You can make sure you have a really good plan in place at the start. So I've thought about what I'm eating on the day. I know what I'm wearing. I know what I'm going to do for my warm up. And these are all things that I'll practice in well in advance of the race. They kind of become part of the training plan. So if I'm working with a client, we are going to know exactly what they're going to eat, what they're going to wear, what their warm up's going to look like a good month plus before the race starts. And then when things start hitting the fan, as they always do, you feel like, well, I've done everything I can do. Now this thing's a bit annoying, but maybe I'm going to like, and I have a plan B. Okay, if I know I have an extra 15 minutes, I'm going to go chill out, eat a granola bar, and I'll do one or two more warm up drills. So you just create this kind of sense of control. And from experience with runners, we're all giant control freaks. So when you end up in a situation where the race isn't going to plan, if you haven't kind of given yourself some tools to deal with that, it can be very, very difficult. So the kind of idea of pre-race routine, mantras, self-talk, all they're doing is giving you a sense of control. They all fall under that category.
Did you ever see? I can't remember. I think it's a girl who was about to do long jump or something, and you can see she's doing self talk even before she's about to go, and she's just saying, I think she's saying like run, jump, whatever, and then she goes
Hmm.
and she hits a world record or something. Did you ever have when you're like kind of in the part of a run or a race where like it's really hurting you, and it's like do you have that kind of when maybe not even inner dialogue, but when you're like verbally speaking when you're running to kind of help keep you going or to push you a little bit further? I know I remember when I ran my first marathon and I was like, oh my god, this is absolutely hell. I think I had like 5k left to go and I hadn't ran that far yet, and I definitely wasn't prepared for it either. But I just kept on saying, just put one foot in front of the other, just put one foot in front of the other, because I was in absolute agony. But like just saying that out loud actually really helped.
Mm. Yeah, 100%. It's something I really tried to put a lot of time and effort towards developing. And the thing that is really important to note is I know exactly the high jump you're talking about, but she didn't do that on the spot. That is something
No.
she practiced
Yeah.
for probably years. And it's not a simple case of just kind of like saying a few things to yourself
Yeah,
because
yeah,
you have to understand what'll motivate you. Just get on with the car, just run it.
yeah.
And you're like, wow, that really worked halfway through the marathon.
Yeah.
You're building your kind of, again, it all comes back to that tool belt of what works for you and what works for me might not work for someone else. So
Mm,
for instance, when I'm running, I think about kind of flowing. My big physical thing is I roll my shoulders. That
mm,
helps me to kind of relax and release any tension that's held up there because it can take away from your stride if you're tensed up and trying to punch your arms. So I think about rolling my shoulders back. I think about what I kind of call, because there's three types. I kind of break down my say workouts. They feel like they are grindy, they feel like they are stridey, or they feel like they are floaty. And a
mm.
grindy session is one of those ones where you, no matter how hard you push, you just can't hit your paces.
Yeah.
You're, whatever reason, you've gone out too hard, maybe you're just like not feeling it that day, you are grinding, and it doesn't matter how hard you grind, it is just not working. There's kind of stridey ones where a stride is a kind of running term where you do it where you're not going your maximum pace. You're kind of doing a semi-fast sprint. So a stridey session is normally like you have to work hard, but you can hit your paces. So you're kind of like you're having a good day. And then there are floaty days where you can't go slow enough to hit your paces. You are just flying past everything. There's no real work or effort in it. You are just on it. So I use the word float. When I'm going along and I'm struggling, I try to tell myself float. And that does a couple of things. It's a reinforcement of like I feel good, but it's also the kind of difference in your approach. Because when you're grinding, you're pushing really hard and going nowhere. When you're striding, you're kind of like you have to stay honest, you have to stay focused, but it's not happening easily. And when you're floating, it's just going. You're not thinking. It's kind of like your flow state,
Mm,
essentially.
mhm,
So I try to tell myself I'm in that state, even if I'm not.
mm.
And because I've practiced it, because I've kind of convinced myself through a lot of repetition that when I'm feeling floaty, I'm feeling really good. That word has a lot of power for me. So
Mm.
that's what kind of self talk and mantras are all about. They're positive associations in your mind, and they can be positive or negative. So if you're kind of experiencing a really good moment, you can also use them to bring yourself back down. So, like patient, calm. I ran a marathon. It wasn't necessarily their selected mantra, but it became the mantra of the marathon because I was pacing some guys and they were trying to hit PBs and they kept every time we got to a fan zone, they would absolutely bomb off because they were kind of getting excited by the kind of noise and the drums and everything. So I just basically pulled them back a few times and explained like I want you guys to be patient. You're feeling really good right now, but it's kilometer 5. I want you to take that excitement and put it in the back pocket until kilometer 35. So the mantra for the race was just back pocket, back pocket. Every time they start accelerating away from me, just back pocket. I say that, and suddenly that word took on a whole new meaning to them. It's like, oh, actually, yeah, I can chill out. So the way I recommend people going about this is just kind of during your training session. There's a lot of different words, look up some ones, but just what is your self talk? First off, trying to become more aware of it. Is it positive? Is it negative? If it's negative, that's okay. But is it in a negative way that's helpful? Because I will often be kind of drill sergeant with myself and be like, come on, Rick, you worked really hard for this. You can do better. Versus, you're worthless. This is terrible. They're not helpful. But within your self talk, what are the moments of your self talk that you find really helpful and motivating? And extracting from that, there's probably something in there that is a word you could start practicing using during your training when it gets hard. So that comes race day, you can just think this to yourself and it really will impact your performance. There's a lot of evidence to back this up. It sounds very woo woo, but obviously your mind has a really big role in how hard you can push. So if you are using things that from a mental side of the game assure you you're doing good work, you can do more. it's going to help you to push on and achieve more.